Check. Oh, looks like we're online. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Nathan from jazzguitarlessons.net. This is the live monthly Q&A webinar. This is June 21st, 2017. Welcome, everybody. I just wanted to remind everybody that this is the webinar that I host every month. And here I answer your questions that you sent in via email, things that I've seen on the Jazz Guitar Store, questions that you've posted and asked about, and like, how does this work? Or I've seen you do this, Mark, on summertime, or something like that. Things like that end up happening, and I see your questions, and I try to answer them as best as I can. So just a little bit of a bonus for you members out there. Standards members, core members, and unlimited members, as well as Tune of the Month Club members and private students of mine and Mark's get access to the live Q&A webinar every month. And we usually do it around the third Wednesday every month. So this month, we'll be focusing on questions that you sent in, like I said, but also we also focus on the Tune of the Month for that month. So for June 2017, it's I Fall in Love Too Easily. I know last month's webinar, I ended up saying that it was actually Have You Met Miss Jones? That's next month's webinar, and this time I promise it's next month's webinar. A bit of a brain fart there, so I didn't realize that I ended up skipping a month by accident. Sorry about that. So this month is I Fall in Love Too Easily. Next month is Have You Met Miss Jones? I gave you I ended up telling you an apocryphal story about Giant Steps and John Coltrane and stuff like that. That's for next month. Maybe I'll repeat that at the end of this webinar. Anyway, let's get to some of the questions to start off with. Just so you know, for any of you tuning in live with me right now, welcome. Hi, and also please, if you look at the YouTube window, there is the YouTube window for the actual streaming. There's actually a live chat that you can send your comments in, send in your questions, and that way I can see your questions scrolling up on the side. I'll answer those actually. I'll answer the ones that were sent in by email first, and then I'll answer questions that I see in the group chat after that. And that way, any burning questions that you have about jazz guitar, and Tune of the Month Club standards, arrangements, things like that, or technique, anything like that, theory even, please send in your questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. So this week we didn't actually get too many questions sent in by email, but this first question is from Fred. Hi, Fred. What on earth is going on in measures 12 to 14 of the chord melody in I Fall in Love Too Easily? That's a really good question. And actually, there's a really neat part sorry, Fred is referring to a really interesting part in I Fall in Love Too Easily. The chord melody wherein we land on an F minor chord in the chord melody, and from there we actually just extend it for 2 bars, or a bar and a half, I think, actually, if you look at the form, if you compare it to the form itself. We're going from an F minor to A flat minor 7 to D flat 7, and then heading back as a backdoor 2/5 to E flat major. What happens there is we actually we ended up extending that those 2 bars into 3.5 bars. There's a bar of 2/4 in there. And actually, I wonder if I can even show you my screen for that. Let me just see here. No, there's a screen share. Okay. Application window. There, let's just try that one out. So right now you can see what I'm looking at here. Bar 12, bar 13, and bar 14, which is this half bar, this bar of 2/4, 2 beats in the bar. Let's see here. Yes, so we end up having this long run going up this arpeggiation of an F minor major 9 sharp 11. It's not really so much of a chord as it is just a description of all of the different harmonies that are happening in there, all the different chord tones and extensions that are happening off this F bass, because it is a solo piece. It is a solo chord melody. There's no, if you noticed, this is a rubato chord melody without a backing track. No drums, no bass, no piano, nothing like that. So what that means in this case is that what we end up playing before in the bass, so like say in the, I'm not sure, you can see my mouse here, I think, yep. Actually, can we even zoom in a little bit? That might make things easier. That's a little bit too far. Here, that's a little bit better. We start with this F, this F here and this A flat here in the very first beat of the bar. That sets it up as F minor, where we're playing F minor, F, A flat, root third. And if we look at the bar before, we have a G minor 11, 2, 5, 2, sorry, and then C7, C altered really, sharp 9, sharp 5, flat 9, flat 5. So an altered 2, 5 leading to an F minor. Very important to see that. And essentially what's happening here is we've just extended this extended over these 2 bars, this sort of stop time sound. And actually I'll even pull up the actual recording of the chord melody, just because I haven't actually practiced it myself. So so you get this sound here. I'm going to turn it down, make sure. So I'm going to start from the 2, 5. So 2, 5, 1, F minor. And let's just look at that first bar. We have these notes that sort of follow this F major minor 9. We in fact have F major minor 9, and I think that chord symbol is wrong. It should be actually F minor major 9, which is to imply F. This is going to be a little bit tricky here, but it's F minor, so F, A flat, C, with a major 7th, so that'd be E natural. And you know, let me just give you a quick sound out of what that sounds like. So we have F minor major 7. You've all heard this. It's kind of like the James Bond chord, as opposed to an F minor. Pretty sad, you know, whatever words you want to use to describe it. It's kind of sad sounding, kind of dark sounding. Well, the F minor major 7 has a bit of more of a sinister vibe to it. F minor 7 with the E flat, not so not as dark sounding. It's a little bit more mellowed out because of that E flat. But that F minor major 7, very specific chord sound. I'm hitting too much. So we have that as the basic chord sound, but we also include the extension of the 9th. So we got this sort of sound. And then we also have a sharp 11 in there. And that's all of these notes put together are actually used to imply not necessarily just this one chord, F minor major 9 sharp 11. So like I mentioned before, it's more meant to represent shifting harmonies that happen over this F bass line. Like I said, we set up at the beginning of the bar, and I'll share that screen again. We set up at the beginning of that bar the F bass line. So here we are right here. And we get again, once again, we get this. Check. So that's just exploring taking a long time in stop time to explore the wide range of different types of harmonic colors we can apply over this F minor sound. And some of the notes, such as the major 7th, the E natural, sort of imply the dominant of F. So C7. It's like we're shifting between an F minor sound And sorry, let me just make sure you can see this. But switching between like a sort of F minor sound and a C7 sort of sound, C dominant 7, but over the same bass. Actually, I don't think there's any 13th in there, but you sort of get the picture of just this wide range of F minor and all the different ways of pushing and pulling within F minor. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's the way the harmony really, this passage really sounds. It's not a chord, it's just a single note. It's a long 16th note, single note line. So it's better so looking at the chord symbol there, it's better to see it as this wide exploration of harmony with all these different things in mind. I'll make a correction to that chord symbol in the sound slice later, and in the PDF. Only just picked it up now. I didn't realize the major and the minor were switched. It should be F minor major 9 sharp 11. So that's what's going on there. But what's really neat, I'm gonna share my screen again to show you the last part of it. What's really neat is that, again, this is this stop time sort of exploration of the sound that ends up adding a few more quote unquote beats. But because we're solo guitar chord melody, we have the ability to sort of expand this moment in time that really should only be 2 bars into 2.5 bars. It's kind of funny that way, and I'll just show you again what I mean by that. We have this bar of 2/4 here. There's just 2 extra beats added. So we add 2 extra beats during this exploration, and then we're right back to the melody. So I'll explain that as I play it. Whoops, my bad. Exploration. And here it comes back to the melody. And we're pretty much at the end of the tune. So that's what's happening in those 2 bars. Let's see here. That's what's happening in those 2 bars, and I hope that sort of helps to better explain what's happening in that moment. It's a weird moment that you don't usually see, but again, because we're in a solo format. There's no backing track. There's no drums. There's no bass. There's no piano. We have the opportunity to just sort of expand this one moment in time out into this really neat harmonic exploration, and it has a lot of different. I always urge all my private students to, when they're listening, try and figure out exactly what those feelings are those sounds, those gestures being made musically. What are they exactly to them? And different students will have different explanations of what that sound might be. But so long as you're thinking of what that sound is to you, it becomes a lot more. You become a lot more effective as a musician and as a listener. Same thing. So so for that part there, where we're hearing, it's kind of mysterious maybe, and it has some darker connotations too. And then we're right back to this bright sounding "Love Too Easily," and that's the part where it's like where it goes. Let's just hear that again. Fall love too easily. I can't remember exactly the lyrics in that part, which is related to another question actually. But again, that's what this part is representing. This part where we're hearing this large harmonic exploration of sounds and gestures and colors, whatever metaphors you want to use to describe it. It's music. It kind of defies description sometimes, but the exercise of describing what's happening is important to us as musicians, as listeners, so that we have a better understanding of it ourselves. If we don't ask the questions, then we'll never get the answers for ourselves, or we'll never ask more questions, something like that. So that's what's happening in the chord melody there. And sorry, who was it was Fred. Thank you, Fred, for your question. I really appreciate that. and I hope we answered it for you. If you have any questions, just email me at nathan@jazzguitarlessons.net. Once again, that's nathan@jazzguitarlessons.net, or just email the jazzguitarlessons.net email. That's admin, ADMIN, at jazzguitarlessons.net. Admin, like administration, at jazzguitarlessons.net. And you can just email us and ask us to clarify or ask about specific things, whatever you want. The second question I have here is from Norman. He asks, Nathan, I recently read your article on jazzguitarlessons.net. Thank you. On jazz performance. Yes. Could you please elaborate on what you mean when you say we have to rethink performance as jazz musicians? So a couple months ago, I wrote an article on jazzguitarlessons.net as part of the blog section. It was an article called "Why We Need to Rethink Jazz Performance." It was an article about how essentially when we're all of us as students of jazz guitar, we focus an awful lot on how to play the damn thing. You know, how do we play this beast over here, and how do we learn jazz music, and what is it exactly, and what's the vocabulary involved in the rhythms, and we focus an awful lot on how to play it, or what we're playing, I should say, but we don't really focus a lot on how to play it. You know, like there's always those jokes about jazz musicians versus, jazz guitarists versus rock guitarists. A jazz guitarist is a musician who plays 1,000 chords for one person, or 1,000 chords for 3 people in the audience, whereas a rocker is someone who plays 3 chords for 1,000 people in the audience. And it's a joke and it's funny, but there's a bit of a sting there, because it's kind of true. A lot of jazz music ends up being a lot of jazz performances end up being not a lot of audience members. And the reason for that could be a lot of things. Could be a particular musician doesn't market themselves well. Maybe jazz isn't for the masses. Whatever that means. Another thing could be like, maybe the musician isn't that good. But assuming we're all us being jazz musicians, a lot of us take a lot of pride in the practice of our craft. We spend a lot of hours composing music and arranging music and practicing guitar. Geez, we spend a lot of hours practicing guitar. There's something missing, I think, from our performances, in that when we're on stage, if you picture any sort of jazz ensemble on stage, you might hear you might see the saxophonist blowing away up at the front of the stage. Maybe he'll look at the other musicians for a count in, for a cue, to cue them, to bring them back into another section, whatever ends up happening. But when you think jazz musicians, generally, I think of someone who doesn't really look at the audience. Someone who isn't really connecting eye to eye with an audience member, smiling at them, doing a bunch of the things that people would consider be in the realm of rock or something like that. Like play out, do the guitar faces to the audience. You want to really present. Presenting is kind of a bad word in jazz. That's what I really mean. It's what I'm really trying to get at. And I don't think it should be. So the article that I wrote is all about how presenting to your audience, and acknowledging that there's even an audience there, regardless of whether it's 3 or 1,000 people in your audience. I think it's really important for us jazz musicians to incorporate performance as into our practice routine. So you sit down, you warm up with scales, arpeggios, you practice improvising over a tune, soloing. You practice comping over a tune, soloing. You do all these things. But I think it's important to stand in front of a mirror and look yourself in the eye, because a lot of people, I think, are really scared of doing that. It's tough. It's a little bit easier, and also really important, to look your fellow musicians in the eye, actually, as well, because as guitarists, I think it's really easy for us to play guitar and go And it's like, great, I'm looking right here at this space, and this is the entirety of the bubble, and everything around me disappears. That being my fellow bandmates, my fellow my fellow bandmates, and the audience members watching my performance. And it can be kind of alienating to audiences. So maybe the music is alienating to audiences. Maybe the music isn't for everyone, isn't for the masses. But we're not. I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by actively alienating our audiences by not, looking at them at the very least. That's just one thing. There's a bunch of things that you can do to actually practice performance. So Norman asked me to elaborate a little bit. That was the premise of the whole thing. Sorry for the long-winded explanation. But that was the premise behind my article. And I plan to write future articles explaining exactly what I mean by you can practice performance. So part of it, eye contact. That's the most important thing, I think. From there, once you get out of your bubble of this fretboard area, and you start looking at the people watching you and listening to you, including your bandmates, because they need to know what you're doing. You need to connect with them, most importantly, to create this really amazing improvised music we call jazz. Connecting to our bandmates is the most important thing. From there, you can after that you can work on your audience connection too, whatever. But I really think that it's super important to connect with your musicians, your fellow musicians on stage at first. So if you're looking at the drummer, let's say, you're far more likely to pick up a really neat shot or set of shots that he does every bar or something like that, or your pianist, she might be playing a particular line underneath comping with you, and you could pick up on that. Or you could do vice versa. You could try and get them to pick up on something that you're playing. And suddenly, instead of this sort of wanky, here's my guitar line, here's my guitar solo, okay, great, now that my guitar solo is done, piano solo, whatever, I'm done here. Instead of that, you get this more collaborative experience of that sort of jam feeling in a performance, of playing with each other collaboratively, creating music together on the spot, improvising together, instead of that sort of wankiness of person A, saxophone player improvises now, trumpet player improvises now, guitar player improvises now, pianist improvises now, bassist improvises, and then everybody trades forward the drummers, and then you do that every tune, whatever. Okay, cool. So that's one part of it. Connect with your audience visually. Make eye contact. Connect with your band members visually. Make eye contact. And from there, you can actually communicate better. You're not closed off. You haven't severed the connection between each other. Good. That's the one thing. Another thing that I think is really important to think about actually for jazz musicians is set lists. Whenever we put a set list together, it's like, all right, well, we played 3 swing tunes at around 140 beats per minute. That's like the most boring tempo in jazz. Great. Okay. So medium upswing. Now let's play a Latin tune. Let's play a bossa nova. Let's some good old ACJ. Antonio Carlos Jobim. Awesome. Now let's go back to another couple of swing tunes. Maybe we should play a really up one, like Cherokee at 230 beats per minute or something, or Donna Lee, or Giant Steps. Let's do Giant Steps. Or let's not do Giant Steps because it's too hard. I think we can take a very radically different approach to set list creation, and putting in a bit of thought instead of calling it on the bandstand, being like, okay, does everybody know There'll Never Be Another You? Cool, let's play that next. Or let's play Confirmation. You guys know it? Yeah, sure. Putting a little bit of thought into creation. I know that we improvise as jazz musicians. We learn to improvise with our music, but maybe we shouldn't improvise everything, by which I mean we should have a framework for our performance. So creating a set list that takes our audience through different moments of highs and lows, of happies and sads, of specific affects that we want to impress upon our audience, is another aspect of connecting to our audience, I think. And planning that in advance, I don't think there's any harm in that. I think actually it's really important to do that, actually, planning in advance how you want your audience to react, and that way your improvising doesn't become meandering. It becomes directed and well thought out and focused and genius even. All it takes is a little bit of forethought and practice doing that. So I think the more you do these particular things I'm saying, the easier it becomes to actually do them, and the better you get at them as well. It doesn't become such a tough sort of thing. It doesn't become such a giant well, how do I plan out a set list with these swing tunes? So arrange songs, band shots, and then get your band members to actually gesture physically these shots. Play together with it. It doesn't have to be like choreographed dance moves. Here's another thing I'm talking about is body language and gesture. Because sorry, I know I'm weaving in and out here. I'm going off on tangents and stuff, but another thing that I wanted to talk about is body language and gesture. So if you look at music as a language, it becomes a lot easier to see the different things you can do to communicate more effectively. The idea is to connect with your audience members, let them experience amazing moments, whether it's emotional moments or dancey moments or funny moments if you're into comedy. It could be any one of these sorts of things, but give your audience something that they'll remember, and give your band something that they'll remember, a show that they'd love to play. And so if you think about it in terms of communication, language, one huge aspect of human communication is body language, gesturing, like I'm doing now. Didn't mean to do that, but you see what I mean. Like I don't know. There's always that idiomatic saying of anywhere between 50 and 90% of human communication is in body language and gesturing. It's true, because it's something somewhere in that range is the truth. It's pretty big. You can say something to someone without moving at all, and without any facial features, facial gestures, expressions, I should say. Sorry, that's what I meant. And they might not get it. But if you and you might be able to say something very simply, but gesture for specific words to add emphasis. Gesture for talking about location or specific feelings of things. Like if something is exciting, you put that into your body. If you're playing guitar and you're playing something exciting, there's always that joke about guitarists and especially rock guitar and their guitar faces, right? And again, it's a joke, but there's something to it as well. So if you're playing something exciting, let me just turn up. You want to get active with your body. But if you're trying to play something like a little bit more, mournful or I'm trying to think of the words, but the words are failing me. If you're trying to play something a little bit more smooth and mournful or something, maybe you want like a... something like that. Different gestures change the way that people perceive what you're playing. If I did that same sort of vocabulary, it's actually really hard to do something like that where you're playing something that's kind of like wailing, but you're doing like an excited, like dancey kind of, like if you try to do this while you're... It doesn't make sense even physically. So anyway, so there's a bunch of things there in terms of body language and gesture that I myself am also working on. but it's something to keep in mind is don't stand there like a rock doing this. Practice in front of a mirror and see what you look like, and you might actually get a lot of insight into the kind of expression and ways you're trying to connect with the audience while you're playing, and you might be able to tweak some things, completely scrap some others, or even just come out of your shell a little bit more and really bodily express the things, the emotions or gestures or things that you're trying to play musically, doing it through your body. And the one reinforces the other, I find. Watching someone who actually gestures the music makes it a lot easier to pay attention to them, rather than someone who just sits there, doesn't look at anything but their guitar and plays, or does the same gestures aimlessly for every kind of musical phrase. Like I said, different musical phrases have different feelings to them, and bodily gestures for one phrase might not work with another one. Like I did there, it just didn't make any sense. I couldn't even play like that. It didn't make any sense. So it might help you musically, and it'll definitely help your audience understand what you're talking about. Musically, talking about musically. So just to recap that question, I know that was a bit of a long one. Just some of the things you can work on are things like putting effort and planning into your set lists, connecting visually with your audience, just looking at them or looking at your bandmates to connect with them, to establish connection through which you can communicate your ideas, be they emotional ideas or actual rational ideas that you're trying to represent through music. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is, so long as you have that connection established, you then have the opportunity to communicate it. But if you don't establish that connection, then you're stuck in the water. You're kind of an island, and no one else is picking up what you're laying down, and you can't pick up what they're laying down. Or it's a lot harder to, at least. And the last one is body and gestural communication, body language, applying that to your musical performance. Those things are very important. There's a lot more in that I can go in depth into in detail. For anybody who's interested in actually where I'm getting these ideas from, it comes from a so-called live music producer named Tom Jackson, Tom Jackson, Jackson. Really good ideas. It comes from a book called Tom Jackson's Live Music Method, and it's a book. It's a guide. It's a how-to on it's a how-to on communicating with your audience, establishing connection with them and your band, of course, too. Crafting set lists, and in terms of energy levels, all these ideas to create memorable moments for your audience. And it's pretty neat. Tom Jackson doesn't sponsor us or anything like that. It's just that I've read up on it. Really, it's a really interesting book. It's a really interesting read, and his ideas are really interesting. If you ever get a chance to see one of his workshops, I caught him back in 2011, I think 2010 or 2011, in Ottawa, and he put on a what was it? He put on a demonstration, I guess, of his technique with a band from Ottawa for the Live 88.5 Big Money Shot. It was a radio contest that I was participating in. It was a grand prize of $50,000 worth of band development funds, things like that. So they brought in this guy Tom Jackson, and he took this band, Autumn's Cannon, I think it was, the last year's winner or something like that. And they played a show, and then they played their song, and he's like, "Great, that's great." And then he proceeded to tear apart their entire set, the individual motions and placements of each member on stage, the guitar solo. He's like, "Get out from behind the pedals, just stand up right at the front. It's your time to shine," kind of thing. And it's like, okay, this is by the end of his work with them, like 30 minutes or 40 minutes later, they played the same song again, and as a live performance, it was miles ahead of where it was. Absolutely fascinating to see. So if you get a chance to pick up his book, Live Music Method by Tom Jackson, or see a workshop of his live, I highly suggest it. It's a really different spin on it's a far cry from, I think, from a lot of jazz pedagogy. The way jazz is taught, we don't really get a lot of that, and I think actually we actively shy away from it. Jazz performance. So that's Norman. Thank you for your question, and thanks for reading my article. Flattered. That's the first article I've ever written for a music blog or anything like that. So I'm glad it was well received, and that's basically what that whole thing's about. I hope to have a follow up to that later on. I have a question from Jim who asks, what is the importance of lyrics for instrumental musicians? So jazz guitar, playing "I Fall in Love Too Easily." You know, if we're not playing it with a singer, then what's the point of knowing the lyrics? Is there a point to knowing the lyrics, and what's the benefit? So I think there was actually, I think the jury is kind of out on this in terms of a lot of the really legendary musicians out there. So I think I'm not sure. I can't think of any particular musicians in general who have advocated for learning lyrics. But I do remember that at least Bill Evans ended up saying he didn't know the lyrics to any songs. I could be wrong about that, but I think it was Bill Evans who mentioned something along those lines. And yet Bill Evans is still beautifully melodic and everything like that. So what's the deal here? Personally, here, 1 second, sorry. Personally, I advocate for learning the lyrics and singing a lot, actually. As any of my private students will know, I advocate singing the melody or singing the bass line that you're trying to learn for a song. If you know those things, if you can sing it yourself, then you can find it on guitar, no problem. It's a pretty simple matter. After that, you just find the notes, and you get easier. You get better at that and faster at that the more you do it. But you know, you have a song like "I Fall in Love Too Easily," and it's a very lyrical melody. You know, I fall in love too easily, I fall in love too fast, and if you sing it, if you put it into your body, because your instrument is your body at that point, your voice box, your chest cavity, your diaphragm, your mouth, all that stuff, your facial expressions too, it adds to it. If you can feel the way that you'd sing it, if you try to play it the way you'd sing it, I think it gives you at least a starting point for how you want to express that piece of music. I think having a starting point at the very least is really important, because sometimes you might sit there and like, well, I can play the notes. I mean, the sheet music's right here. Where the heck is it? You know, the sheet music's right here, and it's, you know, C, B natural, C, B flat. Great. Eighth note, eighth note, eighth note, dotted quarter note. Ending that bar is an eighth note on A flat, going down to G in the next bar, A flat, G. Okay, but what the heck does that mean? You know, I fall in love too easily. It feels like something then. So I'd say learning the lyrics and singing more broadly. I know this is kind of, the singing part is a little bit tangential, but Jim, I think the answer to all of this is making sure that you do your best to learn the lyrics for a song that you really enjoy. It's part of I think it's a good part, a very important part of the tune learning process. You learn I Fall in Love Too Easily, look at the lyrics. On a tangential note, for learning a song, I mean, you can approach lyrics the same way you might approach learning the melody and chords, by which I mean, you know, you can look up the lyrics, you can look up the melody and the chords in a real book, or you know, any fake book, or any transcription online. But it might be better for you in the long run, or it'll definitely be better for you in the long run if you try and learn it by ear. So listen to Chet Baker singing "I Fall in Love Too Easily." Listen to the original recordings on the original Broadway musical, Hollywood movies, recordings of "I Fall in Love Too Easily." I can't remember what the musical it's from. Can't remember, but look that up and listen to it. Sing along with Chet Baker. Sing along with the original singers on Broadway, and or in Hollywood, and that way you'll actually have a much more tactile memory of the song. It becomes a lot easier to memorize the form that way, rather than just picturing a bunch of chord symbols in your head, or picturing the melody in your head, or something like that. So kind of tangential again, like I said, learn the lyrics by listening to somebody sing it, and actually listen to multiple people sing it, because everybody changes little lyrics around here and there. It doesn't really end up mattering, or sometimes it matters, but listen to a bunch of people sing lyrics, and really get to know them by sound rather than by reading it on Google Lyrics or something like that, or A to Z Lyrics or whatever it is, that website. Same thing with chords and melody. Instead of learning it out of the real book, which is good, try transcribing a tune. Learning chords is really tough at first compared to melody. You can hear it, the melody, and you can sing it and you can play it out. But singing chords is a lot more difficult to test your ear on. A lot more notes in a shorter span of time, and sometimes they cover each other up, things like that. Give it a shot anyway, and the more you do it, the more you'll find actually the easier it becomes. So that's what I'd have to say about lyrics. Thank you, Jim, for the question. Let's see here. There's one more question here about from Joseph. He asks, I have a question about guitar comping. I've watched you comp before for standards like Summertime. I think he's talking to Marc about this. So Marc played the arrangement for Summertime on Tune of the Month Club. How do you know what passing chords to play, and how are you able to place them? Joseph, thank you for the question. Passing chords. Passing chords is a bit of a tricky subject. It's kind of a little bit of a black art that you just have to. It takes a lot of time to just familiarize yourself with them. Takes a lot of time familiarizing yourself with them, and experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't, and keeping what works and throwing away what doesn't. But I can go through some basic organizational thought process for it. So the first thing I want to talk about is functional harmony. This is the main starting point for understanding how chords work in Western harmony, and in jazz and in pop and all that stuff. Less so pop; it's a little bit more modal than functional. But every chord that you find in a key, say the key of C major, and I get my guitar for this. Let's say you're in the key of C major. Ooh. Sorry about that. So let's say you're in the key of C major, and that's, as we know, has no key signature, or no sharps or flats, I should say. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, C, D, A, G, F, E, D, C. Cool, great. So C major. If you build a chord with a root starting on every one of those notes, one at a time, you get a pattern like this. You get the first chord on C is a C major seventh. Let's go with seventh chords. C major seven. The second chord you get starts on D, so this is the 2 chord. D minor 7, E minor 7 for the 3 chord. For the 4 chord, you get an F major 7. For G, the 5, you get a G dominant 7. I'll get back to that one in a bit. For A, you get A minor 7. It's the 6th chord, A minor 7. And we'll get back to that one in a second. Each of these has a function. That's where the term functional harmony comes from. So I'll get back to that after I finish this. And then B, the 7th chord of the scale, of the major scale, is a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Half diminished chord is what some people call it. Minor 7 flat 5. Sorry if that's too loud. And then we're back to C major. So back to 1. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1. Each of these chords has a particular function in terms of how they deal with tension and how they resolve to one another. So if we start with the 1 chord, the tonic chord, tonic means the 1 in the 1 note in the scale, the first note in the scale. So our tonic chord is C major 7. It has a particular function. It has the function of home. Home, like you're going home, you're walking home. Well, we're home now. We're at rest. It's good. We're good. You can play it as a C6 if you want to make it less tense with that major 7. But either way, it's home. It's good. We're good to go. Not much to do from here. In jazz, we have the most important things that we have are the 2 and the 5 chords. The 2 chord, which resolves with D minor 7, which resolves nicely to G7, and then resolves nicely to C major 7, 2, 5, 1. You've probably heard that before. So each of these numbers describes a function, and each chord in that each chord has a function of having a certain sort of tension in the notes that resolve to the next chord. So you'll notice that the 7th of D minor 7, the 3rd of D minor 7, well, the 7th falls nicely to the 3rd of G7. So, and then the 7th of G7 falls nicely to C major 7. Cool. So those are some of the important functions. So C major 7, tonic, it's home. 2, 5 is a nice progression towards home, resolving towards home. Sometimes you have your 6 chord, A minor 7, which is it's home, but it's minor. It's the relative minor. You've probably heard that before. So you got 1, 6, 2, 5 headed to back to 1. There's a few other things in there that we don't really need to discuss too much, because we'll just deal with the 2, 5s, and 1s, because that's what we generally deal with in jazz chord progressions and standards. So the whole idea is that function describes where we're going and how we're getting there. We're going to 1. We're getting there through 2 and 5. There's 1. So on the sub, that's the setup. Sorry. We want to talk about passing chords. How do we pass between these particular chords? You know, you might have a 2, 5, 1 progression in C. Cool. That's 4 bars of 4 bars, 1 bar each of each chord. 2, 5 to 1. So that's the basic premise of all this. How are we going to get between these chords more smoothly, more fluidly? How do we add more motion between the 2 to the 5 to the 1? And passing chords are the key to this. So a couple of different types of passing chords. You can play similarly functioned. If you play C major 7, you can replace that with the 3 chord. So chords that share a lot of notes together are similarly functioned. They have similar functions to each other. You have C major 7. Well, you could play E minor 7. The 1 and the 3 chord are similarly functioned. Also, the 1 and the 6 chord are similarly functioned. So you can have 2, 5, 6 is kind of neat. 2, 5, 3 is kind of neat, and that happens sometimes. Those are substitutions, but using them as passing chords, you might want to play something like, sorry, 1, 2, let's go from 2, 5. So we got 2, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3. There's a 3 chord. I'm just adding a little bit some bass notes on beats 1 and 3 to add a little bit more motion between the passing chords. So some passing between the passing chords, whatever. So you can do something like that and add a passing chord there. You can also so aside from playing the same function, you can also play or a similarly functioned chord. You can also play passing chords that are not really diatonic, not really part of the key, like chromatic passing chords. So if you've heard Mr. Saturday Dance, that's really all a passage in C major. But doing that sounds silly. Da, 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 da. And you could do it, it works, but this is far more interesting, and you'll find this in the real book, actually, volume 3 or whatever it is, or sorry, volume 1, so the 6th edition real book. So C major, we go to D minor 7, okay, that's part of the key. D sharp diminished 7, ending on the 3 chord, E minor 7, which is similar to C major. So we're getting some actual passing notes happening here. And doing this, actually, you can play things like this chromatic D sharp diminished 7th between the 2 and the 3 chord. And it actually works really nicely. So if you find that you have 2 chords that you're trying to play, where are you going? How are you trying to get there? So we're here. So yeah, where are you going? Where are you? And how are you trying to get there? So we're on D minor 7. We're trying to get to E minor 7. And we can do that chromatically by adding a diminished 7th chord, a semitone between the 2 of them. So if you have 2 chords that are a whole step between each other, you can use that technique. Add a diminished 7th chord that's just popped in right between the 2 of them. And you get this sort of chromatic bass line that happens. Nice. So that's another way of doing it. There's another couple of so you can play chords that are the same function. 3, 1 is equal to 6, things like that. You can replace 2 with 4 sometimes. Something like that. That's F major 7, G7, C major 7, instead of D minor 7, G7, C major 7. You can so you can if you're playing 2, you can go 2, 4, 5, and then you can just start doing things that are out of function, like tritone substitutions. It has the same function, but it's definitely outside of the key, so it's a bit of a mix of the first 2 examples I gave you. So G flat 7 can be substituted with, or substituted for by D flat 7. G7 and D flat 7 share the same 2 notes in it that make up a tritone. And they're also, the roots are also a tritone apart. A tritone is 3 whole tones of an interval. It's an interval that's made up of 3 whole tones. So 1, 2, 3, down to those 2. And the active ingredient, as I like to say to my students, in a dominant 7th chord is this tritone, this really dissonant sounding interval in between, made up of the 3rd and the flat 7. G, B, F. So B and F make up the tritone in G7. Well, those same notes make up the tritone in D flat 7, but instead of being the 3rd and 7th, they're now flipped. It's the 7th and the 3rd, respectively. So D flat. It's really a C flat, not a B in this case. Whatever. And we have an F as the 3rd this time instead of the 7th. So if you wanted to play, 2, 5, flat 2 is what you call it, the tritone substitute of 5. You can go to C. Good. You see, we're already getting more motion that way. So if we add a couple of these together, we got 2 replaced with 4, 5. Yeah, so 2 replaced with 4, and then a diminished 7th in between, going up to G7. Tritone substitute D flat, C major. Play all of that. Yeah. So those are some of the things you can do. After that, there's a couple of other ways you can do it. I'd actually suggest checking out Marc's article, "Walking Chords." It's like walking bass line, but with chords. So if you play like a dominant 7th, like G7, you want to get to C7. We can get there through your first inversion G7 chord. If you keep it to three note chords, it's a lot easier. It's kind of like a Freddie Green kind of style of comping. G7, you can get there, and then you can play C7. So G7, and then you have this first inversion G voicing. So that's B, G, and D together. We're missing the 7th F, and then you can get to C7 that way. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But you can do it. You can now add passing chords between that. So passing chords like G7 on the first beat, a first inversion F on the second beat, that diminished 7th passing chord in between 2 diatonic chords that I mentioned. So chromatic bass line, diminished 7th, heading to G major first inversion. Anyway, there's a lot of things you can do that way. So those are some of the things you can do. But I definitely suggest checking out the article "Walking Chords" on jazzguitarlessons.net that Marc just released. You can find it. You probably just Google it, "Walking Chords," jazzguitarlessons.net, and you'll find the article. No problem. And that's another way of finding these passing chords, but using a walking sort of bass line combined with the chords too. So you get a little bit of diatonic functional harmony combined with chromatic passing chords here and there, depending on what you're trying to do. So check that out, definitely. I realize we're 2 minutes left in the webinar, and I haven't really talked too much about I Fall in Love Too Easily. So I'm just going to do a quick run through of some of the things that I found particularly, some spots in each arrangement that I found particularly interesting. In the chord melody, I would actually suggest we haven't heard a classic rubato chord melody in a while. I think we've done a lot of ones with backing tracks recently, so with bass backing up and drums backing up. If it's a rubato chord melody, you have the time to breathe. I would highly suggest you do that. I know that sounds kind of stupid, but when you have a particularly long phrase, or if you have a phrase, take a deep breath before you play it, playing it, and breathe throughout, breathe out throughout. And when you get to the end of the phrase, finish your breath, take another breath, allow yourself to stop naturally at the end of the phrase, take another deep breath, and go on to the next one. So you get the whole like, I fall in love too easily, I fall in love too fast. So think like a singer, or think like a horn player in that sense, and musically it'll feel a lot more natural, and it'll sound a lot more natural that way. So that's why I'd suggest for the chord melody, any rubato chord melody like that. There's a lot of these 2-note chromatic runs up or down in the short gaps between melody notes. So for example, like you got that. How's it go? And then this one, I love this one. You get and it's with the melody note too. It's great. Another part is in that first 2 bars is another demonstration of it, but you'll see it throughout. Try to separate the voices in the chord melody. You got a lot of things happening at the same time, a lot of point and counterpoint. So I'd highly suggest going to making sure that you can hear the melody note ring out while you're playing another thing underneath, so that it sort of sneaks out from underneath, and then you can let go of it. But don't let go of it before you start playing. So here's what I mean, like. So actually, I'll sing it so you can hear the melody too. So, I fall in love. Oh, whoops! That's what I meant to avoid, actually. Love too easily. So you want to hold these notes over the melody notes, especially. You want to hold them over what's happening underneath, and then you can let go. But it'll really separate the voices in the listener's ears. So keep that in mind. The idea of the separation of voices. That's partly to do with how you play each note and how long you let it ring out for, but also how you strike with your right hand and how you phrase it with your left hand. So make sure that your melody is louder than the rest of it, or at least more apparent than the rest of it. Counterpoint is supposed to be mainly supportive. People are supposed to hear the melody. It's the most important thing. It's a chord melody. But the counterpoint lines are really cool too. But you can make them sort of sneak in from sneak out from underneath the melody, so long as you keep the melody ringing for a little bit. The comping study. This one's a really neat idea, and it's very. I don't know the term. I guess it's kind of like it's really foundational and vanilla in a sort of way, but I mean vanilla in the best sense. I love vanilla. Vanilla is a great flavor. But what I mean is that the idea behind the whole thing is you have the root and the seventh of the chord being played, or the fifth and the third of the chord. So you got this first chord, and then you also have a melody note on top just to sort of connect them better. So instead of having just this sort of thing. So you can very easily play the component parts of the chord: root and seventh, fifth and third, root and seventh, and then fifth and third, and then E flat major seven, root and seventh, fifth and third. The way they play it in the comping study is they add a couple of other notes. They add a note on top of that, a melody note that rises and falls predictably, or in a way that's pretty satisfying as well. And usually it's like the third when you're playing the root and the seventh, or it's the seventh when you're playing the fifth and the third, for example. So it really fills out the sound, the complete sound of the chord. You're not missing any notes, but it doesn't have to be played as a block. It's a lot more. There's a lot more motion to it. So you get these nice little voicings that are kind of they're really pretty and they're sparse. To create more motion in between these chords, because 2 bars of in a bar in this song, I Fall in Love Too Easily, there's 2 chords per bar, but that still leaves a beat in between, where sometimes you can do this, that sort of thing. But in the first bar, he goes F minor 7 for 1 beat, and then in the second beat, instead of staying on F minor 7, he does a tritone sub as a B flat 7, a half step above B7 as a half step above the B flat 7. Sort of leads nicely to it. So F minor 7, B7, B flat 7. So on and so forth. So you can use tritone substitutions to create more motion between chords. There's tritone subs everywhere here. And actually, in particular, bar 7 and 8 is kind of neat. We talked about tritone substitutions earlier. The bar 7 and 8 are interesting because you get 2 bars, and it's A minor 7 going to D7, but then turning the D7 into a D minor 7, and then heading to G7. So it's a 2-5 to G minor, but then we switch to 2-5 in C minor, and then we actually end up on A minor 7-5 again in the next bar. But for those two bars, you get. And what we do is we can actually tritone sub. We can use tritone subs to create a lot of motion in between those two passages. So you get this A minor 7 flat 5, E flat minor 7 to A flat 9 is a tritone sub of A minor 7 flat 5, D7 flat 9, or sharp 9 flat 9, doesn't matter. It's a weird thing in that you can substitute entire passages, tritone sub entire passages. So you get becomes this. And if you play one after the other, it actually sounds really neat. Okay. So yeah, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Back to D minor 7 flat 5 and then G7. So you get this sort of 2-5 that's predicated by 2-5 a half step above it. Anyway, you can see where maybe you can see where I'm going with that. Just check it out. That's bar 7 and 8 of the comping study. I don't have much to say about the single note solo. There's a lot of notes happening in there, but it's all basically two bars, and then every now and then there's like a 4-bar phrase of just solid 32nd notes or 16th note triplets, and it's just a simple pattern. It's like you move up by a step and then down by a third and then down by a third and then you're back up by a third and up by and you repeat the step again, it's just these simple little patterns that you can take through a scale or through a chord scale for those chords at that time, and you just take that pattern ad nauseum through the whole thing. So it really is a single note study. You wouldn't want to play a solo like this. It's like, here's the idea again, here's the idea some more. We're going to play it all the way through. I think you get the point, but we're going to keep going. Okay, I've reached the end of the range of the guitar. It just gives you some ideas of how to play this pattern in multiple places in the guitar, and then it gives you a new pattern to work with, and then another new pattern, and then using the chord scale to, or just abusing the chord scale of the moment to the fullest extent. So that's what's going on in the single note study. The whole thing is pretty cool, and it's chock full of vocabulary that you can use. But I would highly suggest, again, just taking bits and pieces that you like, that you hear. They're like, that's a neat line. I'm gonna rip that one, and then use it, and then incorporate it and practice it into your own playing somewhere, so you can recall it like that. That's really all I have to say about the rest of it. This is my name is Nathan. This is the question and answer webinar for jazzguitarlessons.net. We host it monthly, every third Wednesday of the month. And we usually on the questions that you send in, but also the tune of the month. Of that particular month, the tune of the month, sorry, I should say. Next month we have You Met Miss Jones? We actually have You Met Miss Jones? Not like I said last time, I flubbed that one. But next month, July, is Have You Met Miss Jones? There's a lot of Joe Pass Joe Pass influences happening in the particular arrangements in this one. I'm really excited for it. It sounds really cool. And I hope you tune in for next month's webinar, question and answer webinar. Send in your questions anytime, and I'd be happy to answer them on the webinar. And yeah, once again, jazzguitarlessons.net. Learn jazz guitar with a real jazz guitar teacher. Take care. I'm Nathan, and we'll see you next time.